Guys, Coach Anderson's back for episode number 2 with y'all, and we're putting in the hydrate in carbohydrates today. I sat down with Megan Manderfiled, who you guys will all get to know here in a second, and we talked a little bit about pre-race nutrition, not just what to eat, but kind of the strategy behind it, and gave you guys some great tips and tricks on things you can try if you're someone that struggles to eat well or eat enough before your races, whether they're in the morning or the afternoon. I think we've got some great stuff in here that can be super helpful. Megan also shared a number of awesome resources that I'll link in the show notes. But part of the reason I did a preamble for this episode is by the time this comes out, you guys should be able to go over to Instagram, and this will only be active through the end of the week that this episode comes out. Go over to Instagram, comment your favorite Skratch Labs product and flavor, and we're going to choose 3 lucky winners to get some products sent to them. And of course, send them what they love. So whether you're an orange hydration fan or maybe you're the orange energy chews fan, no matter what it is, strawberry lemonade, anyone? Any of those are up for grabs. So go over to Instagram, comment your favorite flavor. You'll know which post it is. So with that said, let's jump into today's episode. Right. Well, here I have with me Megan Manderfiled. She is the Athlete Care Fellow at Skratch Labs and soon to be the sports dietitian at University of Washington. She is sadly leaving us to head up to Washington, but super excited to watch what she does. Megan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat, and I'll miss you guys a lot too. It's been great working with Peak Performance Running.
I love that. Yeah, you joined us this summer for our high altitude camp for both weeks. You had to dip off a little bit after week 1 to head in for a wedding. So you only really got to enjoy the big sunset hike on week 2, but definitely some super fun memories from the summer.
For sure. Definitely one of my favorite weeks, or 2 favorite weeks in the summer, was your camp. So.
Oh, I'll take that because it's been quite a summer for you. I know that, you and I have had a chance to kind of sit down and talk. I know you've had a chance to, kind of talk with a lot of our athletes. And I wanted to focus our conversation today on kind of 2 main topics, kind of how do we look at fueling for our everyday training? And then how do we look at it and how is it different when we look at it from the aspect of racing? And so these are questions that I get a lot, and I tend to simplify things, maybe even too much. I tend to be somebody who confines themselves to just, these are the things that I can eat because I have a pretty sensitive stomach, but definitely want to kind of dig in and dive into like, how much does, our fueling impact our performance? And also like, what are some just good habits that we can create? And so I think we can kind of jump right into the idea of like training and fueling. And kind of my first question for you is, how many days out do you feel like nutrition will impact performance? Let's say we're getting ready for maybe not a race, but more of like a workout, and our workout's on Tuesday. Does it really matter like what I ate Saturday and Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue as an athlete that every day you should be thinking of how you can build your plates and your fueling plan as an athlete. And I think, if we're trying to think ahead for race day, like increasing carbohydrate intake a couple days out would definitely be to your advantage. If, let's say, on the weekend you didn't really pay attention to your nutrition, something you can do just to, stay as ahead of the nutrition as possible is, increasing your carb intake throughout the day, at least 2 days before your big race, really focusing on eating every 3 to 4 hours and really trying not to go longer than that without eating any calories. Because if you do, you're going to put yourself at risk for energy deficiency and injury, poor performance. And obviously that's not the goal. We want to do our best when we compete. So. Absolutely.
When we think of carbohydrates, I think runners often associate carbohydrates with pasta. Not everybody loves pasta. What are some other great like carbohydrate resources we can think about kind of integrating into our diet?
Yeah, there's so many great options. I would actually argue that like white rice is a great quick digesting carb source, probably one of the easiest to digest carb sources there is out there. Obviously bread, cereals and whole grains like granola or just any kind of cereal. Those are all great carb sources. There's also like other whole grains out there that I would encourage young athletes to experiment with, like quinoa, farro. Like it doesn't just have to always be rice. So, trying to make your diet just more diverse, and, the more variety, the better. But other sources of carbs are going to be fruits. So any fruit is going to provide you a great source of easy to digest carbs. Some have more fiber in them. And then milk actually has carbs as well, just plain old white milk or chocolate milk. If you have a lactose sensitivity, obviously drink something different, but those are going to be your three main carb source food groups: grains, fruits, and dairy.
Love it. I think that, it can always be kind of tricky of like what and how much and when. And so we were talking even before this, like, oh, do we go through like grams of carbs? Like how many should I try to shoot for? If like, I'm going to have practice in the afternoon, like what are we looking at in terms of like breakfast and lunch? Like if I'm going to break it down into like grams of carbs, like what should I be looking for breakfast and lunch?
Yeah, I would say to even make it more simple, you guys could use the athlete's plate models just to visualize how your carb portions. So for endurance athletes, you're primarily burning carbohydrates for all of your training and your racing. So if you can try to have 1/3 to 1/2 of your plate being a carb source, that's going to kind of put you right in that like at least 60 grams of carb per meal range. And you can always do a little bit more, especially on a heavier training day. The more carbs you're going to need, or the longer run that you have that day, the more carbs you're going to need.
Yeah. And I know that one of the...
Andrew just pulled up the athletes' plates here. So these are a really good, simple model that I encourage athletes to use. Instead of focusing on all these numbers, we can look at these visual plates to guide your intake of carbohydrates.
Yeah. And I think these are really important because they make things a little bit more, I guess, easy to understand, and kind of how it's broken up. And I know that the plate model may not seem, super easy, but if we thought of it, for like breakfast, like this could absolutely be, your morning breakfast, cereal, and then we can kind of move over here and people are like raw veggies, cooked veggies, like soups. Like what does that look like in terms of breakfast? Because can I put fruit in here and is that going to be totally fine? If I had like some cereal with some berries in it, do I have to have eggs, or, like what should I be considering for like my lean protein and things over here if we're looking at breakfast?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can like eat any type of meal. It doesn't always have to be a stereotypical breakfast meal. If you like more savory options for breakfast, like leftovers from dinner, that's completely fine. The goal is just to get you eating something. And I actually have a lot of athletes who really struggle to eat in the morning for breakfast. And for those people, I really recommend, maybe you're getting more calories in from liquids, like maybe a smoothie or like the Chobani, yogurt drinks, or the, what else? Like the Bolt House Farms, I think is the brand that makes the other smoothies, the naked drinks, stuff like that can work completely fine just to get you some calories in the morning. I have a lot of athletes who will just, drink caffeine in the morning, and then, that puts you at risk for just under eating total calories in the day. And I know it can be hard to eat in the morning, but I would say start small. Like even if you can at least get a piece of fruit in and it's not that perfect plate, that's okay. Like we're just striving to get you some nutrition and eating more consistently. Yeah,
it can be tough, right? Like, whether it's the European diet or more of the American diet, like it's, hey, we're going to have coffee in the morning. And, the European diet might be like, hey, we're going to have a pastry and that's breakfast, maybe 300 calories, which is definitely like not enough. And I think one of the things for people to consider, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, when we just have that caffeine, it does suppress our appetite, and that's not a great thing to do first thing in the morning because you're setting yourself behind. And I think just in general, being in the habit of having, a Celsius or a Monster or things, first thing in the morning, like you haven't eaten in 8 to 10 hours because you slept, and then you're starting your day right off with caffeine, and pretty much zero calories. And then you're not eating until noon. And so you're getting the majority of your calories then, in the middle of the day. and trying to eat enough so that you're fueled for a run. And if we're using, roughly 100 calories per mile when we're running, if you're doing 5, 6, 7 miles, and if the intensity is up, it could be more of a calorie cost. You're behind, and you're behind in a really big way.
Yep. And another big thing to your point is if we're just eating all this junk in the afternoon, like I hear all these people complain, I can't eat before practice because I have GI issues. And I think if you were able to fuel earlier on in the day, you would definitely help alleviate some of those GI issues. And, just eat more consistently, because I've talked to so many athletes who will, skip breakfast, just do the caffeine. And then at nighttime comes around and they're just binging on a bunch of random snacks, things that really aren't serving maybe as big of a purpose in their fueling plan as an athlete.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this goes back to creating great habits. And that may mean that, you're not going to bed quite as late, especially if you're having caffeine later in the day, which we'll talk about when we talk about racing. But if we're having, not enough calories in the morning, or the habit is like, oh, I got to get up right before school. I'll grab a Celsius out of the fridge and get out the door. Like, that's a poor habit because you're setting yourself behind. And so it may mean getting up a little bit earlier, even if it is, instead of grabbing the Celsius, you grab the 30 grams of protein smoothie from Bolthouse Farms or Chobani or whatever it is. And then you're getting that protein when your body can handle it. Where I see a lot of people struggle is they'll put that Chobani or that lean like protein a little too close to practice. And because the stomach needs more blood to process protein and fat, which there's a good bit of, protein and fat in those drinks, then their stomach hurts when they're trying to run, because what happens when we try to do a workout, right? Our blood goes away from our stomach and then it's not able to digest. And so it's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel good. And so one of the things I tell my kids, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is let's avoid that protein like bar or drink like 2 hours out. It's okay to have at lunch as long as your lunch isn't super late before practice and you're not getting enough time to digest it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think it's like 2 hours out, a really small amount of protein would be okay, but I would, focus on more carbohydrates. So like a little bit of peanut butter at that time might be fine. But if you're doing like large servings of something with protein and fat, it's going to slow down digestion. And you probably will have a stomach ache during your practice because it's hot out as well. And the intensity is high. So,
I think that idea of slowing down our digestion, like one of the things to think about is like, in the morning, you want to have good, consistent energy throughout the day. So having, as silly as it sounds, like if you had a whole grain piece of bread, an avocado, and an egg, right? The classic avocado toast, pretty cheap thing to make at home, very expensive to buy anywhere else. Like that's a great like morning breakfast, knowing that you have practice in the afternoon.
You're getting a lot of fiber there, and that's helping to keep you full and actually pay attention during your classes and not feeling like you're just bonking or can't pay attention. Lack of focus and concentration is obviously a big problem nowadays. And I think if you're able to fuel appropriately with a balanced breakfast, you're going to feel a lot better during the day.
Yeah. And it's kind of the opposite effect of the caffeine, where it's going to drop off pretty dramatically. And then you're crashing and you're like, oh man, I don't feel great. And it's like, one, you don't have any fuel. And then two, like it's a chemical stimulant, like it's just going to drop you off the face of the earth. So with that in mind, let's switch to kind of the idea of racing and fueling for races. We were on the topic of caffeine, so let's stay there for a second. When I see someone, drinking a Celsius or a Monster before a race, I kind of go, oof, this is probably not great. We were just both at the Leadville 100, and that's a little bit of a different scenario. That's, 17 to 30 hours where caffeine is more or less used to kind of heighten your state. And it's not going to have the same effects of diminished appetite because we're moving, and that stimulant is more about keeping us keyed up and keyed in. When I see athletes take caffeine beforehand, I tend to see an increase in anxiety and also, right, heart rate is already increasing, which if you're trying to perform well, there's a breakover point of caffeine. What else do you see in terms of the caffeine piece? Is that like where you see people kind of fall apart because they're not getting enough calories because they're replacing that with calories?
Yeah, I think you're much better off going into a pre-race fuel plan as just eating some quick digesting carbs. It's going to help you perform much better than some energy drink with no calories in it. The other big thing that I see an issue I have with like pre-race caffeine for high school athletes is that's going to ruin your sleep,
Yep.
which will ruin your recovery. I feel like sleep is one of the most underrated, like under talked about topics because it's so important for obviously not only learning and development and growth, but also your performance. And caffeine that close to bedtime, right? Like races are what, 4 or 5 p.m.,
Yep.
maybe 3 p.m. sometimes. Caffeine that late in the day can really impair your sleep quality. Even if you maybe feel like you don't notice it, it really does.
Yep.
And most of your muscle recovery is happening when you're sleeping. So you're just kind of, shooting yourself in the foot by drinking caffeine instead of just fueling your race with actual calories and carbohydrates.
I love that because really great, I guess quote from a coach that I loved is the hours before midnight are much more valuable than the hours after midnight. And if you are impairing those early hours between, 9 and say midnight, that 3 hours where you're doing a lot of muscle recovery, hormonal recovery, and things like that, you're robbing yourself of, tomorrow's successes, tomorrow's opportunities. So if you're having caffeine late, the night before, because you're staying up late and you've got to race the next day, it kind of has this long kind of trickle down effect. I think one of the areas that people get really stuck is we talked about, kind of using the athlete's plate model for lunch. What if I've got like an 8:30 a.m. race, and I've got to try and get some good food in me, and I don't love solids. Like what are some options for an athlete like me who, do I have to get up at 5:30 for an 8:30 a.m. race? Like what do I have to do so I can be fueled for my event?
Yeah, that's a great question, something we encounter all the time. And I'd rather have you get the better sleep than wake up at 5:30. I think there's plenty of options that we can fuel you with maybe an hour before your race, or even 30 minutes if we had to. But I would recommend, at that point, focusing on much more simple carbohydrate. You probably wouldn't really add a protein source to that breakfast that close to your 8:30 race. Again, that could be a fruit smoothie. Maybe you're not putting protein powder in it, but it's mostly just like blended fruits.
Mm-hmm.
So you could even do a sports drink. I know like Skratch, our high carb drink mix, a lot of my athletes who struggle to eat the morning of races will, sip on that throughout the morning while they're getting up and just kind of getting their body into their routine for the race. Some other options, you could even do half a bagel. If you could do a full bagel, if it's like an hour out, maybe just with like a tiny bit of honey and a little bit of peanut butter,
Yep.
just to get those quick carbs in. You could do a banana, you could do granola. So lots of good options kind of close to that race, but definitely not much fat. You want to avoid a lot of fat and fiber in that meal because that's again going to slow down digestion. You maybe won't absorb those carbs as quickly and you might have a stomach ache.
Yeah. And I think what's important there is thinking that, for that milk, if we're going to have it, is it better to probably go with like a 2% versus a whole milk just because it's got a lower fat content?
Yeah. Yeah. Even 1% or skim, or like you could do almond milk if you want, or
Okay.
oat milk. Either way is fine. But yeah, just trying to get some quick digesting carbs in. I know it can be hard to eat in the morning. So I think a lot of my athletes tend to stick to the more liquid calories at that time of day. But
And that's why you mentioned a Skratch product. And again, this isn't some, episode about Skratch products, even though you work there. One of the things I like about the high carb drink mix is that you can mix it to a certain amount of calories. And so you don't always have to have it at full strength. 400 calories, I think, is 7 scoops, which is what, 100 grams of carbs or 50?
Yeah, 100 grams.
Okay.
So you could even do half of that. And actually, we've been mixing it in the applesauce lately.
Nice.
We have a whole post on it on our Instagram and our blog. You can check it out. But it tastes really good, and it's like very easy to stomach and get down. So if you like the go-go squeeze things, to bulk that up and get some more carbs, you can add our high carb mix. And that would be a really easy way to get some carbs in early in the morning.
And I think that's a great way of something that you can have kind of throughout the morning. I've always kind of gone with like, I want a bottle with carbohydrates in it. And then like, I like to have a little bit of something, but for me, it could be a banana. It could be like, I really like those mush oatmeals. Those tend to
those
be,
are great.
those are great. Like or even just making your own overnight oats. But
Yep.
even like, you can do some great things with rice, like adding in some cinnamon or some chocolate chips, and warming it up kind of like you would with oatmeal. If you're not someone that likes oats,
Yeah, rice can be sweet or savory. I
yeah,
feel like a lot of people just don't really try out the savor or the sweet side of rice, but like there's rice cake recipes on our website as well that are pretty portable and you could make those ahead and have them for a week. Like you could keep them in your fridge and take them to go.
yep.
So the sweet rice cakes are really good actually. There's like a peanut butter chocolate chip one we have or a cinnamon chocolate chip.
I love
So,
that. I love that.
yeah.
So let's think a little bit about the hydration side of things. If, whether it's morning or afternoon, if we're thinking the afternoon, it's probably going to be pretty warm, especially early in the season. Like how much do I actually need to be drinking and how far out? Like if I'm just, warming up or whatever, and I've got like a 16-ounce bottle, like should I try to get that down as quickly as I can? Like what is the best strategy here?
I think when it comes to hydration, the best thing you can do is carry a bottle with you of water all day and just sip on your fluids. I don't really ever recommend chugging because your kidneys have to just filter that out. And then if you've ever chugged, you'll notice like your pee is just pretty clear. You're probably thinking you're really hydrated, but really you're not actually absorbing all that fluid. So minimum day to day, we need about half our body weight in ounces of water. So if you're 100 pounds, you need at least 50 ounces of water per day. And that's outside of exercise. During exercise, if you're only exercising for about an hour, I think you're okay with just pre-hydration, post-hydration. If you want to sip during, that's great, but I wouldn't chug anything
Mm,
during exercise. And something, when it comes to like electrolytes and sports drinks, especially on a race day or the day before, you could, try to pre-hydrate a little bit with a sports drink. Something with that extra sodium is going to help you actually absorb a little bit more water and, go into that race or hard practice really well hydrated. So did that answer your
yeah,
question?
no, that was great. I think sometimes people are like, oh, well, I don't want a ton of sugar in my drink mix. And I think what's important for people to understand is that before a race, like having like sports drink mix, whether, it's like scratches, flavors or another thing like that, sugar is a good thing. Because
Yeah.
it helps us actually absorb and utilize that sodium better because we have the carbohydrates that are coming from sugar. But if you're an everyday drink, person and you don't want the sugar, like what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, carbohydrate, literally has the word hydrate in it. Carbs in our body are stored as glycogen, which holds on to a lot of water. So it's going to help you absorb more water, carbs with sodium. But to your point, yeah, if you maybe are eating enough carbs, you just don't want something sugary, you can use a lot of brands make a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix only with just the sodium and other electrolytes. So Skratch's everyday drink mix would be an option for someone who doesn't want to drink the carbohydrate. But I will say, like pre-race, if you're drinking that an hour before your race, you're going to be burning those carbs during your
Right.
race. It's not going to really do any harm to you. I know there's a big fear, that goes around about sugar, added sugars, carbohydrates, but athletes are a different population. I think that you just need to remind yourselves of that you guys are actually burning a lot of carbohydrates throughout the day. And it's going to benefit you in the long run to consume carbs before training and racing.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the not so fun side of things. When stomach gets upset, cramps, things like that, not just stomach cramps, muscle cramps, things like that. Like when you think, stomach, is pretty upset with things like what are some signs, or what could have led to something like that?
Yeah, I think, well, cramps, I kind of think of them stomach cramps and then more of like the muscle leg cramps. So for stomach upset and like abdominal cramping, it could be related to are you chugging fluids, like we
Mm,
just said? Are you consuming, like, for example, our gut can't really absorb more than 60 grams of glucose per hour. That's kind of the max glucose rate. So if you're consuming way over that, that could be a problem. Again, if you're consuming fiber or fat or a lot of protein really close to your training or race, that could contribute to cramping as well. So lots of different causes there. When we think about muscle cramps, now those are probably more related to like maybe you need a new pair of shoes, or maybe your muscles are just fatigued. Maybe your glycogen stores are depleted because you're under fueling.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it could be a fueling problem. Could be heat. Lots of different things. Could be, just overtraining, for example.
Yeah.
So I think, something to consider, like if you are cramping really bad, something that can help is consuming, pickle juice shots, if you've ever heard of that trick, or something really tart or sour, like Sour Patch Kids or anything like that could help, because it triggers this spinal reflex that can help stop it in the moment, but it's not really a long-term solution, but something you could try.
I experienced that last year with Joy at Leadville. We had somebody that was like, "Oh, my calves are cramping really bad," and just we gave that person we had the hyperhydration mix, and we mixed it really like heavily, and oh man, the reaction that they got. But then it was like it went right away, but that's like in a pretty serious case of like overuse. I think for most athletes, especially if you're training for a 5K where your longest effort might be 70 to 90 minutes once a week, it's probably, in the world that I see, a lack of sleep and recovery, and then the underfueling, right?
Recovery is such a big one.
Absolutely. And I think, again, one of the biggest things, and this is a whole nother conversation about food and hormones and things like that, is you have to have a lot of fat, or enough fat at least in your diet, to be able to have proper recovery. And so I know we could talk for a while about why that's important, especially in this early, stages of growth and development. But let's kind of close out this. I know I'm giving you a tricky one to close out on here, but what are some good like sources of fat? I'll give you an easy one like avocado. But what are some other things that I should consider if I'm trying to increase my fat intake?
Yeah, like you said, fat is actually a very important macronutrient. We want to try to focus on getting higher quality fats. So like salmon and fatty fish sources are going to be helpful to give you those omega-3s. Trail mix, like nuts, seeds, all of those things are really good for getting healthy fats. If you guys are cooking, using things like olive oil, avocado oil, and kind of just trying to limit your intake of more fried foods. But yeah, fats play a really big role in actually body temperature regulation, hormone production, recovery. We need fat on our body to function. So definitely keep focusing on quality over quantity for that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we have like, I grew up in a generation that feared fat. And I think, like even like things simply like nuts also have a high amount of folate in them. So that can be, really great, way of increasing, just a handful of nuts. One of my favorite evening snacks, we have these little ramekins at our house, and I do like a handful of almonds and a handful of chocolate chips. And that's kind of my little favorite sweet treat for the night. I know that probably puts me out there as a pretty boring guy, but like that's a great little treat to have at night to kind of keep things simple.
Snack.
Yeah.
And actually, on closing note, I do always recommend a good bedtime snack for people. There's a big misconception like don't eat after 8 p.m. or whatever. But a bedtime snack is going to be really helpful to help your muscles recover, and getting a source of protein and healthy fat like the nuts and chocolate chips. That's a perfect example. Or like Greek yogurt with some granola. Great things to help your muscles actually recover and take up that protein overnight.
Absolutely. If you are someone that is sensitive to caffeine, chocolate may not be great. I tend to go for a semi-sweet chocolate versus the really dark chocolate, even though, again, dark chocolate and things like that can show to be great for you. But yeah, so a lot of really great information in this episode. Is there anything else you kind of want to, share with athletes, or, any great resources? I know you talked about, we have the athlete plate. I have the Skratch blog, and then you shared one Instagram account with me that's really great, mostly focused on high school athletes. Anything else you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you guys are looking for nutrition information, obviously I shared one athlete dietitian with Andrew to share, but looking for credible resources online, like if you're following nutrition pages, make sure it's a registered dietitian or performance dietitian. That's going to be really helpful. And then I guess one other big thing I can just share is I just keep trying to eat consistently throughout the day. Like we were saying before, every 3 to 4 hours, it's really important that you are fueling so that you can have a consistent supply of energy for your training and recovery. But if you guys have any questions, you can always reach out. Happy to chat or do whatever I can to help you out.
Awesome. I know you'll have a new email address here soon, so I will encourage people to maybe find you on the Instagram side of things to shoot you a note. Where can they find you on Instagram?
Oh yeah, my dietitian Instagram account that I recently started. It's pretty dry right now, but it's Meg the RD.
Awesome. I will link.
Feel free to follow.
I will
I gotta
link.
work on the content side of things, but
Awesome. I will link that in the show notes here and on the blog. But Megan, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me today.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome.
It was a good time.
1, 2, 3, focus!